Welcome to Faith and Science. I'm Dr. John Ashton. Recently, I was watching a news program on the television, or a program commenting on some of the events that were happening, and it was about people who were scamming people in the area of fortune telling, or telling the future. And essentially what was happening was they would have these little booths where they advertised that they could, tell the future. And there were people that were very concerned about what was going to happen, or about their children, what was going to happen to their children. And what would happen is that the people would go into the place of these shysters, and the shysters would say, "Whoa, look, there's something really bad is going to happen. There's a curse on you. You'll have to do this, but we can get rid of the curse for you, but it will cost you $2,000 or $3,000." And so they were. And people were paying this money to these people, and the people would go through some sort of rigmarole and claim that they had removed the curse and changed the future. I think down through history, people have always wanted to know the future. We have the account in the Bible of King Saul, the first king of Israel, going and visiting a witch, hoping to know the future. We know also that during the Second World War, Hitler wanted to consult mediums and find out to make decisions what would be the best way to go to know the future. And of course, many popular magazines and newspapers have these horoscopes where people are looking to the stars to know the future. Of course, most scientists would say, well, all this stuff is hokey pokey, but there is actually a science related to knowing the future, and it's called forecasting. And most of us are familiar with the weather forecast. Maybe we look it up on the internet on one of the weather websites, or maybe we watch it after the news on television or something to know what's the weather going to be like tomorrow. Is it going to be sunny or rainy and so forth? And this is forecasting. And forecasting plays a role in many areas. People try to forecast economic changes, try to forecast changes in prices of different commodities, from coal and oil, and things like this, wheat, and this is part of everyday business as people try to understand what prices are going to do and whether they should buy at a particular time. Forecasting also plays a role in trying to determine sales for a company, for example. So if you're a manufacturer and you're manufacturing a product, you need to that is distributed, say, to a large number of stores or outlets throughout a country or throughout the world, you need to be able to forecast demand for your product, and so that and maybe you manufacture certain items at certain times, need to be able to forecast what is going to be the demand for those particular items at certain times, so that you have enough raw materials or raw ingredients or components to assemble. You have enough stock on hand to supply the demand. And there are a number of computer programs have been developed that people use to try and forecast what is going to happen. And this is based on human behaviour, often based on previous sales data and may be related to the time of year. People may buy things or use things more at certain times of the year than others, or it may be something that's temperature related or climate related in some way. So scientists certainly look at, mathematicians look at ways of knowing the future. And one of the areas that is actually related to evolution actually is about a man by the name of Robert Fitzroy. And many regard him as the pioneer of weather forecasting. And he was born in 1805 and was the captain of the HMS Beagle. Now, the HMS Beagle, of course, was the ship that Darwin went on when he made his voyage partly around the world, and at that time developed in his mind at least, or began the whole concept of the theory of evolution. And this is very interesting because it was actually Fitzroy who gave Darwin a copy of Lyell's book that had outlined his whole concept that there was not a worldwide flood, but rather gradual processes over millions of years had formed the various formations in the earth. And this was, of course, when Darwin was given this book by Fitzroy, he read it on the voyage, and of course this gave Darwin the framework of long ages on which to base his theory of evolution. So it gave him the long ages to allow for this whole concept of mutations gradually over a long, long period of time as animals bred, plants bred, that they slowly changed, organisms bred, and they slowly produced the different species according to the theory of evolution. So it's really quite ironic that it was Fitzroy that gave Darwin this book, and it was actually one of Fitzroy's regrets, Robert Fitzroy's regrets, because he was actually a strong creationist. He believed in Genesis. He believed that Genesis was correct. He believed that there was overall a whole lot of evidence for the global flood, and that this explained a lot of the structures. It's interesting. Fitzroy was quite a clever person. Matter of fact, at only the age of 23 years of age, Fitzroy was given his first commission as captain of the HMS Beagle. And so it's a very young age to be given the command of a ship like that, which was a 28-metre, 214-tonne sailing ship. Of course, it was quite a few years later, in 1831, that he set out on his famous voyage with Charles Darwin. And Fitzroy was sort of a friend of Darwin, and he took Darwin along, was interested in having someone who was also a fellow intellectual along on the trip there. But Fitzroy spent most of his time on that trip actually surveying and studying ocean currents and winds and so forth. And Fitzroy also on this trip wanted someone to make the scientific observations about the plants and animals in the places that they would visit. And so that's one of the reasons why he invited Darwin along. And of course, Darwin was an expert on beetles as well. And Darwin had actually been recommended to Captain Fitzroy by a professor of botany at Cambridge, John Henslow. So that's how the two meet up. So it's quite interesting that Fitzroy, who was really a very strong Christian, when he began actually the voyage, he had some doubts about Genesis and the universe, and that the flood was worldwide. So this was Fitzroy himself had a little bit of doubt initially. But during his observations on the voyage of the Beagle, he actually, as he observed these structures all around the world, these layers of rock all around the world that were similar, he came to realise that the flood must have been worldwide. And this is quite interesting because at this time, as Fitzroy was confirming his faith in the Bible, Darwin at the same time on the same ship was thinking about how, in actual fact, life could have, proposing that life had evolved over a long, millions of years period of time. So here we had Fitzroy, who understood the days of creation as literal 24-hour days, and was a very strong supporter of the Bible. And of course, later Fitzroy's faith in the Bible was encouraged by his wife Mary, who was also a very strong Christian. One of the arguments for the global flood that Fitzroy used was, as he looked at the nature of the shells in South America there at the depth of water, and the mashed up shells and this sort of thing they saw in the different deposits that they came across, he felt that there must have been a great force that had broken up these shells and then forced the rocks together in the layers. And of course, this was all over the world. Also, he considered that it was absurd that man had arisen from some other primitive animals like apes. When Fitzroy saw the South American Indians and their hair colour and so forth, he felt that it was very obvious that people all around the world had descended from the original couple of Adam and Eve. In fact, Robert Fitzroy was also present at the famous and often misrepresented debate between Bishop Wilberforce and Thomas Huxley. And it's reported that he, during that debate or after the debate, Fitzroy held his Bible aloft and stated, quote, he regretted the publication of Mr. Darwin's book and denied Professor Huxley's statement that it was a logical arrangement of the facts. Another thing that I found out on reading this quite interesting article about Robert Fitzroy was that in 1843 he was appointed the Governor of New Zealand, and he was well known later for dealing very justly with the rights of the Maori people, including the right for maximum benefit from the sale of their land if they desired. So it's quite interesting. Fitzroy made a lot of observations of gales around Cape Horn, and this led to the design of an improved barometer, and he wrote a book called The Weather Book, which was first published in 1858, and that became a manual for forecasting changes in the weather. I thought this was really interesting, this science of forecasting and the connection with the development of the theory of evolution, and how people can look at the same thing, the same rocks and fossil evidence, and one can see that this is evidence for the global flood and biblical creation, and someone else at the same time can see, no, this fits into millions of years, and again develop this idea that mutation slowly changed and developed all the species at that time. I find it quite fascinating. Of course, now that we know so much about DNA, we know now that evolution is absolutely impossible. Evolution, random mutations, by chance can't produce the complexity, the working complexity of human organisms and the amazing structures and interconnectedness that we have of the various parts today. We have the overwhelming evidence now that evolution is absolutely impossible. And also, as well, we know now that the Earth had a catastrophic past, that there were major extinction events that occurred caused by water that wiped out the animals. So we have this now. But one of the fascinating things that comes out of this too is that science can know the future, but only on the basis of observing what has happened at the present time and then extrapolating that into the future. Where science falls down is in the area of what we call chaos theory. In other words, there are random reactions that can happen that totally change situations. And a classic example of this would be, for example, people that were making forecasts about economic demand, oil use, coal use, energy use, different food supply things. And then suddenly you have the intervention of the COVID-19 virus, which suddenly changes a whole lot of things. Human behaviour has changed, people's buying patterns have changed, people's movement patterns have changed. A whole lot of things happen just very quickly that, again, couldn't have been predicted so much just from other stands. Now, of course, in actual fact, there were suggested predictions that, for example, a deadly type of virus could somehow be released into the human environment, and people made scenarios of how prepared would people be for that sort of thing. And again, this is a very mechanical view of things. But when we look at things smaller in chaos theory, there's a ditty, then it goes something like this. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. From loss of the rider, the battle was lost. In other words, just a little thing like a poorly put in shoe nail, which led to the shoe coming off the horse of the rider that was taking an important message maybe to a general in a battle, led to the battle being lost. So some minor insignificant thing can occur like that is very difficult to predict, and we can't know. But it's interesting, as we read the Bible, God talks about how He reveals and establishes Himself as the God, as the Creator God, and as the God whom we can know by revealing the future. And this is what He talks about, and Isaiah talks about this in, around chapters 44 and 45 of Isaiah. There He talks about that, how this is how you can know me, in that I will reveal the future to you. And of course, Isaiah is famous for his prophecies describing what would happen to Jesus, the messianic prophecies. But also Isaiah, in the later chapters of the book of Isaiah, particularly Isaiah 65 and Isaiah chapter 66, he talks about that God will create a new heavens and a new earth. And I think this is very, very encouraging and a very important aspect of understanding the future, and that God is in control. We don't necessarily have to know the future, but it's good to know that God is in control. See, Hitler wanted to know the future because he wanted to stay in control. And he was looking for, guidance to make the best decisions so that he could stay in control. But God reveals himself as being a person who is control, and he has been in control all the way along, because when we read even right back down in Genesis, the early chapters of Genesis, God predicted that even though the devil and his angels have been cast down to earth, that God had a plan, and that eventually the devil would be destroyed, and there would be an end to all these sin and problems in the earth. Another amazing prophecy, of course, mentioned by Isaiah is the coming of Cyrus, who would free the people from Babylon, that this would be a man that would be raised up. And of course this was written 150 years or so before Cyrus was born. And Cyrus became that leader, of course, that liberated God's people at the time, Israel, that had been held captive in Babylon. And we have the account there, the amazing account of how Cyrus himself was preserved according to the traditions. He should have been murdered and killed as a baby, but according to the traditions, he was preserved and raised and grew up to become the king, and lead the armies there, and led the Persian army very successfully into to capture Babylon. And also he was very kind to the Jewish people there, and of course and fulfilled the prophecy that the temple would be rebuilt. So God had given a number of prophecies there in the Bible. We also have the prophecies in Daniel related to Jesus coming at the time. And here we have these time prophecies that span very long periods of time that relate to exactly the time when Jesus would come as the Messiah. And so when we look at knowing the future in terms of the future, science can tell us things such as, we're doing massive amounts of environmental damage that are going to threaten life on Earth. They can tell us about the rate at which animal life is becoming extinct, and in particular insect life, for example. I think I mentioned it recently that about 25% of the insects that of population has become extinct in the last 15, 20 years or so. And so science can tell us these things, that here we have these particular trends, these things are happening, and there are all these warning signs pointing us to a major environmental catastrophic event for the Earth, as we see a number of environmental issues are arising with deforestation, pollution of the oceans, plastic nanoparticles in our oceans, which I imagine are going to be very difficult to clean up, the destruction of the ozone layer, that has occurred in the increased radiation on Earth as a result of that again affects ecosystems. Just the Earth's population of humans and feeding the Earth's population, having enough water, particularly fresh water, all these issues. And while scientists are working flat out to try and solve and reverse some of these issues and encourage people to change their behaviour to try and reverse that and preserve as much as possible the quality of life on Earth. We see at the same time the evidence all around us of good and evil. We see even times of crisis, such as during the time of the COVID-19 crisis, there were people that did bad things during that time, brought out the bad aspects of people, taking advantage of others. At the same time, it brought out in other people the really good side of them, their generosity, their helpfulness, and thinking of other side of things. And so we see this conflict between good and evil, and that's exactly what the Bible talks about, has been there all along. The Bible, of course, calls it sin. But I find it so encouraging that God has proved himself with so many predictions and prophecies in the Bible. I remember when I was first becoming a Christian, that was one of the things that I looked up. As I came across the prophecies in the Bible, I would go to the encyclopedias and look up what actually happened to that town, where God prophesied what would happen to Tyre or what would happen to Sidon, to these different towns, what would happen to Babylon, what would happen to these different places and these different people. And all the time, each time I looked it up in the encyclopedia, there it was verified. And I think we have this tremendous hope that just as all these prophecies where God revealed the future, and there are hundreds of prophecies. I have an encyclopedia of Bible prophecy at home now. I think there's about 700 Bible prophecies in there. Most of them have been fulfilled accurately, and the ones that haven't relate to the future or were conditional. And I think this gives us great hope when we have those passages, as I said, in Isaiah 65, Isaiah 66, and in Revelation 21, that God is going to create a new heavens and a new earth, and also in the book of Peter's books, God is going to create a new heaven and a new earth for us, and we can be there as we accept Jesus as our Saviour. I encourage you to read these prophecies in the Bible. Remember, you can listen to these programs by just Googling 3ABN Australia, all one word, .org.au, and click on the listen button. I'm Dr. John Ashton. Have a great day.
You've been listening to a production of 3ABN Australia Radio.